Hello, my name is Edita Zimny, and my topic of focus for the Sleep Science Experiment Term Project is how sleep time affects migraines and quality of sleep. The reason I chose this topic is because I suffer from chronic migraines, and I noticed that migraines disrupt my sleep quality and that a lack of sleep is a migraine trigger for me. What really inspired this project was a 2016 article by Dr. Yu-Kai Lin titled Associations Between Sleep Quality and Migraine Frequency. This study was a cross-sectional controlled study that investigated the relationship between sleep quality and migraine frequency. The Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, which from now on will be referred to as the PSQI, was used to evaluate the sleep quality of the participants. The PSQI is a sleep questionnaire that looks at time in bed, sleep onset latency, and many other sleep terms that come up with a score that reflects an individual's sleep quality for the past month. In this study, there were 357 subjects, 134 of which were the control, and the remaining were migraine patients with migraines that occurred once or more a month. Participants completed a screening questionnaire and were then interviewed by a board-certified neurologist and headache specialist to narrow down the migraine patients. During the screening, subjects were to complete a PSQI. Examination of PSQI scores found that the more migraines that a subject had, the higher the PSQI score would be, meaning poorer sleep quality. The reason I found this study interesting is because I noticed that the more migraines I have, the worse my sleep quality is. And that led me to thinking, I'm a college student who doesn't always get my full 9 hours of sleep, and what would happen to my sleep quality and frequency of migraines if I were to sleep 9 hours a night? And that's what I chose to investigate. I decided to grab a few people I know who suffer from migraines and gave this experiment a shot. The experiment I created was a within-subject design that consisted of two conditions, a control sleep condition and an experimental sleep condition. Each condition lasted 5 days with 2 recovery days in between. During the control sleep condition, participants were to go to sleep and wake up as they usually do, and this was done to establish a baseline. During the experimental condition, participants were given a specific bedtime that was determined from the control days that allowed for 9 hours of sleep. For the duration of both conditions, participants were to complete 3 diaries and questionnaires. They completed a headache or migraine diary that I created, which examined the subject's headache and how sleep played a role in it. Another diary in the study was the evening sleep diary, which was created by the Sleep Foundation that looked at the habits of the participant. These were to be completed every night. Every morning, participants were also asked to fill out a sleep log from the Sleep Foundation that examined sleep from the night before. For ease of convenience, I turned these sleep logs and diaries into Google Forms so that participants were more likely to comply. Originally, there were 3 participants, but one of them dropped due to personal issues, so the final population was 2. When looking at the variables, I manipulated sleep time. Therefore, that is the independent variable. The dependent variables were migraines and sleep qualities. My hypothesis was increased sleep through the manipulation of bedtime would decrease the number of headaches or migraines that an individual would have and would therefore increase the quality of sleep. And here's the data. During the control group, you can see that on this graph, hours of sleep pretty much varied. But when you take the average among subjects 1 and 2, they slept for 6.9 hours a night. During the experimental group, participants were supposed to sleep for 9 hours a night. Ideally, that would have been the case. Unfortunately, as you can see on this graph, for the first 2 nights, subject 1 slept 4 to 5 hours. This was due to unforeseen circumstances of disrupted sleep due to uncontrolled sleep conditions. Those 2 days really messed with the data due to these conditions only lasting 5 days and having only 2 participants. Therefore, I decided to look at the numbers for the control group, the experimental group, and the experimental group subtracting those 2 days. The data shows as follows: the control group averaging 6.9 hours, the experimental group averaging 7.7 hours, and the experimental group subtracting those 2 extraneous days, averaging 8.5 hours. These hours only include time asleep and not time that a subject has woken up during the night. In this experiment, there was also a migraine or sleep diary that the patients completed every night before going to bed. During the control group, there were 7 out of 10 migraine days. During the experimental group, 6 out of 10 migraine days. And during the experimental group, subtracting those 2 extraneous days, there were 4 out of 8 migraine or headache days. Comparing the control versus experimental group, the results were not statistically significant since the standard error of the mean bars overlap. This would mean that the p-value would be greater than 0.05 and therefore not statistically significant. However, when comparing the control group to the experimental group, subtracting those 2 extraneous days, the error bars do not overlap, which would suggest that the p-value could be less than 0.05, which would therefore be statistically significant. When looking at sleep quality and sleep time, I could have used the PSKI, but the PSKI focuses on sleep for the past month and quantifies a whole lot of different components of sleep, such as sleep onset latency, and a whole lot more. I wanted as much compliance as possible when it came to the diaries and logs that I would only focus on self-perceived sleep quality of each night. Therefore, I looked at how the PSKI was scored, and I specifically looked at the scoring instructions for component 1. This component consists of responses that can be found in the daily sleep log from the Sleep Foundation. In the PSKI, certain responses are assigned a certain score as seen in this reference. However, in the sleep log, there were similarly worded responses, so I decided to code them as similarly to the PSKI as follows. The higher the number is to 3, the more severe the sleep quality would be. The average score of the control group was 1.7, which showed the highest sleep difficulty, followed by the experimental group with 1.3, followed by the experimental group subtracting those 2 extraneous days with 1.2. The results of both the experimental groups compared to the control group were seen to be statistically significant due to the error bars not overlapping. The results of the study suggest that an increase in sleep time both decreases the frequency of migraines or headaches and increases sleep quality. However, there were a lot of limitations in this study. First, the population size was 2, and there's absolutely no way that this study can be generalized to the total migraine population. Second, each condition only consisted of 5 days with 2 recovery days in between, and that is not long enough to complete a study like this. Third, I looked at the data comparing the control group to the experimental group, and the experimental group that didn't have the 2 extraneous days. Fourth, the study was done using self-report, and while self-report is great, it comes with a ton of downsides, such as compliance issues, or more importantly, how sleep questionnaires don't just measure sleep. They measure our expectations, feelings, emotions, and a whole plethora of other things, and that leads to the third variable effect. There were confounding variables that could have led to this outcome. The places where the subjects slept were not controlled, the food the subjects ate, what the subjects were feeling, etc. Further studies should look at how 8 to 9 hours of sleep affect migraines and sleep quality, while controlling as many variables as possible, having a bigger sample size, and maximizing time for each condition. This experiment was a ton of fun to do, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think or if there's anything you'd like to add to this experiment. And here's the sleep research!